Hey everybody, hope you are doing well. Breaking news today in the JonBenet Ramsey case. This is a case that we've been covering pretty extensively over the course of the past couple of years, and I know it's been one of those cases that people have talked about. And the actual handwriting of JonBenet Ramsey has been confirmed on that ransom note. And I'm going to show you how and why we know that in just a couple of minutes. And so that to me leads to there being an explanation of why there's been some coverage in the way that there has been the past couple of days. I want to explain it to you and in a way that I think is going to be logical so that you can understand how we've arrived at now we have a solution to this case. And it has involved John Ramsey, the father of JonBenet Ramsey, since the very beginning. And I had some questions initially about that male DNA that was found on JonBenet Ramsey's person, and I'll explain to you why that's not so. And it involves also Jason Jensen. Jason Jensen's an incredible private investigator. He has a master's degree in criminal justice. He's been on this show many times as we've talked about it, and so he put this actually as his cover photo yesterday, and he said this. He said, "My story with JonBenet Ramsey began in August of 2022, so about a year ago, during Cold Case Month." He said, "Why? That month was our announcement that the Cold Case Coalition, was now national." So he's a part of the Cold Case Coalition. He said, "I wanted to start on the hardest case that I could think of to demonstrate that we, the Cold Case Coalition, can make a real difference, like opening the only multi-million-dollar nonprofit DNA lab in the country with the largest state-of-the-art equipment that not even police labs have yet." He said, "Immediately, JonBenet Ramsey's story came to mind, and I reached out to the Ramsey family, including John Ramsey himself, with a single question based upon my experience investigating cold cases." He said, "Fast forward, it's only been 11 months. Time will tell if we help. We've collected DNA and tested it. We've traveled to multiple states for interviews. We've collected other evidence. In my opinion, we are close to wrapping this up." And I would say they're very close to wrapping it up. And so I commented on that. I said, "What were your thoughts on the recent confession?" And Jason says, "Gary Oliva says he did it. He said he didn't mean to kill her." And if you know Jason, sort of the way that he talks, to me, that's coming across as okay. Jason Jensen, who's been working on this case for the past 11 months, thinks that Gary Oliva is responsible for what took place. And so I said, there's a discrepancy in the DNA found on her and then his DNA. And then Jason said, "Well, I cannot agree with you on that." And I just said, "Okay," because I trust Jason Jensen definitely more than I trust myself. So I started researching it a little bit after that conversation with him. And the DNA that was found on JonBenet Ramsey is this DNA they were calling UM1, or unidentified male 1 profile DNA mixed with JonBenet Ramsey, found in blood spots of panties and not on other crotch cuttings. In other words, it sounds like they don't think that this was some kind of an SA situation. And then I found this email. The email started by saying, "Hi, Andy. I've completed the testings of the cuttings from the crotch." This is from the actual team, the Bode Tech team that was working on this. "I've completed the cuttings from the crotch. At this point, I was not able to produce the mixture profile. I only have data consistent with JonBenet with no indication of a mixture. From here, we could go back to the actual underpins. It appears that the area where the mixture DNA profile was obtained was on the edge of cutting from the crotch. We can match up the cutting and determine the larger area from the end. And we're going forward, we'd like to test a few other things." Well, then they got this email back that's involved and it says, "Thanks for the update. Just to confirm, you used the identifier kit on the extraction from the 3 combined cuttings and found only the victim's profile. So running mini filer would not be likely to produce additional alleles, right? Since there was no indication of a male contributor, Y filer would probably not be useful at this point. The Denver Police Department lab used a concentrated sample of an original extraction to develop the male profile. Would a higher concentration of a new extraction sample be helpful? Would it be useful to rerun the concentration that Denver PD used?" Essentially, what this is testing is they're basically saying this unidentified male, it's basically impossible and it's unreliable to get down to the bottom of what's going on. And when I asked Jason Jensen about it, which hopefully he'll be willing to come on the show to talk about this case at some point, he said, "This is not really a DNA case to begin with. This is actually a case That's more about figuring out the handwriting because that DNA that's on JonBenet Ramsey could have came from any male that would have been in the building at all. It could have came from a detective. It could have came from one of the first responders. It could have, came from somebody that was dealing with her in the transport process. It wasn't necessary that that male DNA actually came from whoever this person was. So Jason said this honestly, how close is the John Benet Ramsey case from being solved? This is not a DNA case, contrary to popular discussions. Touch DNA was an afterthought in this case. In other words, in just a minute, I'm going to reveal to you whose handwriting that was that now has been definitively determined. And it's kind of shocking. It says in 1996, DNA was solving cases where there was suspect body fluids present, blood, semen, or saliva. One touch DNA came around. It is entirely probable that the trace DNA collected from the victim's article of clothing was innocently transferred from a handler. And these are the people. It could have been a police investigator. It could have been an evidence tech. It could have been lab personnel. He said, but I direct you to the ransom note. For years, Patsy Ramsey was falsely, and it makes me mad that they do this to families, accused of the murder because she scored a 4.5 on a 1 to 5 scale, comparing her handwriting to a ransom note. 4.5 is nearly a 5, meaning not a match. Before any possible suspect could be fully eliminated, DNA is only one component. The suspect's handwriting should be compared to the ransom note. There were hundreds of letters written by Gary Oliva that should be reviewed, comparing the handwriting to the ransom note. And there, Gary Oliva is. He has a ton of handwriting samples that we can look at. And I'm going to share with you from somebody
Hi,
brought
this
in
is
by
Dr.
Jason
Moza
Jensen
Martin.
and uh, John Ramsey to assess this handwriting, and this is their official opinion on what took place. And I want you guys to open your ears up because this is, I think, going to be pretty shocking information.
Hi, this is Dr. Moza Martin. Since the discovery of John Benet Ramsey's body in December 1996, I have been often asked about my opinion as to the author of the ransom note. Those who know me also know I do not follow true crime cases and therefore could not give a definitive or professional opinion.
I think that's something really important to note. She doesn't have skin in the game. She's not a true crime YouTuber. She's not trying to be involved as much as possible and trying to have the latest and greatest piece of information coming out in the true crime world.
Approximately 10 years later, a man named John Mark Carr randomly confessed to the crime. On the local news at the time, I saw snippets of handwriting samples between John Mark Carr's and the ransom note. Although I immediately could tell it was not the same author, another handwriting analyst went on the news and stated that it was indeed John Mark Carr who wrote the ransom note.
So John Mark Carr was a guy who initially confessed at the very beginning. We talked about him recently. He went on the news to try to talk about what took place and even had confessed. Some random handwriting person analyzed it and said that John Mark Carr handwriting did match.
Although I had never shared my opinion publicly about that, one thing I did say consistently to anybody who asked was that if we can identify the author of the ransom note, we are one step closer to solving the crime. On July 10th, 2023, private investigator Jason Jensen, working with John Ramsey, contacted me and asked if I would be willing to examine the ransom note and compare it to known writing samples of a specific individual. And
So Jason Jensen and John Ramsey jointly reach out to this woman to take a look at handwriting samples of a suspect they have in mind and also the ransom note.
therefore render my official opinion. I believe one reason that I was chosen is because I would approach the case with an open mind, having no preconceived or biased views. This is in direct contrast to many other handwriting analysts, experts, and even the general public who have unfairly blamed Patsy Ramsey and scrutinized John and Burke. It is important to remember that everyone reacts differently to trauma, and just because somebody does not react the way you would does not render them guilty of a crime. Since July 10th, 2023, I have been diligently comparing the ransom note with numerous known handwriting samples from this specific individual. I have devoted extensive time and effort to this task, working almost continuously, often around the clock. The samples I have examined include the ransom note, but also known handwriting samples from the time around the crime to more recent years. As a result of my meticulous examination, I have formed a highly confident professional opinion. I am hopeful that in the near future, I will be given permission to share my visual evidence with you. But for now, let me say this. Despite the possibility and likelihood that other analysts and even the general public will attempt to discredit me or my findings due to their tunnel vision and biased belief in Patsy's guilt, their attempts will not influence my opinion. That's why, in order to maintain my credibility, I took the initiative of sharing my results with another trained question document examiner named Dawn McCarty.
She has her work peer reviewed by Don McCarty.
Dawn independently examined the same documents and reached the same conclusion. Therefore, it is my professional opinion that Patsy Ramsey did not author the ransom note. It is my professional opinion that John Ramsey did not author the ransom note. It is my professional opinion that Burke Ramsey did not author the ransom note. Instead,
Important to note, Burke Ramsey didn't do it, Patsy Ramsey didn't do it, John Ramsey didn't do it, and she's about to reveal.
based on 36 international years as a court qualified question document examiner and forensic handwriting expert, it is my professional opinion that Gary Oliva did, in fact, author the ransom note.
Gary Oliva, the man who just confessed, did in fact author that ransom note. Jason Jensen and John Ramsey have taken on this case, and they've been putting the squeeze on Gary Oliva for the past 11 months. And today there is a resolution because we knew whoever wrote that ransom letter is responsible for what took place. And this woman, who is an expert in this, has been doing this in the court for 35 years, has confirmed that that handwriting is Gary Oliva. Let me know what you guys think down in